Oh, you again. Hello. I don't know why, but that's good. You're curious. Do you know what I heard? A new video from PressX is being made here. I think I know what it's about. It's a shame it's already time for you to go. Promise you'll watch it.
For almost 10 years, the Silent Hill series, which includes 8 full-fledged game parts, dozens of comics, minigames, and movies, has been in the shadow of oblivion. And the whole series should be grateful to only one game, the remake of which will soon see the light of day. If you thought that the horrors of the small town called Silent Hill would end so easily, then it's time to take a sedative. After all, today we'll continue diving into the darkest corners of the most tragic, mystical, and generally the best part of the Silent Hill game series. Of course, we're talking about the iconic Silent Hill 2. Mystical fog, cultists, demons, and mysteries. All this is already waiting for new guests of the wonderful resort town. Today we'll talk about all the ups and downs of Silent Hill 2. A rather sad story about love and death. Why does the Pyramid Head wear a pyramid on his head? What technology did the developers use when creating the characters? And what does crime and punishment have to do with it? You're on the PressX channel, so make yourself as comfortable as possible. It will be scary, tense, but very interesting. By the way, if you suddenly missed our last part of the story about the terrible world of Silent Hill, we recommend that you return to it using the link in the description and watch. And we are getting started. It's the beginning of the 21st century. After its release in 1999, the first part of Silent Hill became extremely popular. The game topped the sales charts in many countries, many gaming publications wrote favorable reviews, and because of it, the game grew a huge fan base. But despite such success, the manager and ideological leader of the first part of Silent Hill, Akira Yamaoka, left the development team, and Team Silent also left with him. Programmer of the first part of Silent Hill, Naoto Oshima, motion designer Naoko Sato, and background designer Isao Takahashi. And if Team Silent could somehow survive the dismissal of 3 secondary employees, the dismissal of Toyama was critical for the team. After all, in addition to the fact that Toyama was the ideological leader of Silent Hill, he was also the main developer of the game. He wrote the script, designed the locations, dealt with organizational issues, and much more. Therefore, the first question for Team Silent was who would now manage the development of Silent Hill 2? Lest you wonder why exactly this question arose, no one from Team Silent, let alone from Konami, even thought of canceling the continuation of such a successful game. So, who would be able to take the helm of such a responsible project? He turned out to be Akira Yamaoka, a programmer who was one of the first to join Team Silent and always supported Toyama. He put forward his candidacy, and those employees who remained at Team Silent supported Yamamoto's offer. So, Takayoshi Sato, Masahiro Ito, Masahi Sobayama, Hiroyuki Owaku, and Akira Yamaoka teamed up for Silent Hill like a team of rangers. As you know, a samurai has no goal, only a path. But Imamura and the team had a goal and could not embarrass themselves, the company, and the Silent Hill fans. Therefore, a couple of months after the first part of Silent Hill's release, they began the strategic planning of the second part of the game. Imamura, in negotiations with Konami executives, insisted on the allocation of a game's considerable initial budget in order to create something really cool. Also, in accordance with the budget increase, Team Silent began to recruit new employees. And from 15 people, the Team Silent grew to 60. Because of these huge changes, the team needed to define these roles, and especially to appoint a new game director. So, Imamura became the producer of Silent Hill 2, and the director of the game was Masahi Sobayama, who worked as a background designer in the first part of Silent Hill. Masahiro Ito returned to the position of art director, Akira Yamaoka returned to the position of sound director. Hiroyuki Owaku became the screenwriter, and Takayoshi Sato became the designer of characters and CGI creator. The roles were figured out, and after that, work on Silent Hill 2 project began. However, despite the fact that the team was recruited, the roles were distributed, and the budget was allocated, Imamura still had to figure out what the sequel would be about. The only thing that was known for sure was that the continuation of the story arc of Harry, the boy who survived,
that you should be destined for this wand when its brother gave you that scar.
Oops, wrong text. There will definitely not be a continuation of the story arc of Harry, a man who survived all the occult and demonic searches for his daughter from the first part of the game. And then, what should have happened next? Due to the fact that the team's technical and financial capabilities of the first part did not make it possible to implement many ideas in the game, there was a lot of work left for the updated Team Silent, which could be used in the second part. In addition, when the first part of the series was being developed, they first created the technologies of light, darkness, fog, and the town of Silent Hill itself, into which the plot was fitted later. Now that the core mechanics in town already existed, the development team could devote much more time to the story of the game's sequel. But time did not stand still. After the release of the first part of Silent Hill, the Sony company announced the appearance of its new console, PlayStation 2, on the market, which immediately changed the game's rules. The new console was more powerful and had a larger amount of memory and gave the green light to new possibilities and ideas of Team Silent. And these possibilities were accompanied by big problems related to the engine and in general with the future game development. We'll talk about this now because this is how ambiguous the development of the future legend of the game industry was for Silent Hill 2. As we never tire of repeating in our videos, every modern and future masterpiece once began with an idea and the people behind it. The birth of Silent Hill 2 is no exception. Trying to gather all the past work into a heap, each of the team members offered the director ideas and topics that they personally liked. Unlike the first part of the game, for Silent Hill 2, the team decided to go even deeper into the secret corners of the human mind. Everything should have been even more gloomy and creepy. According to Takayoshi Sato, horror must have pierced the hearts of people, and to do this, you need to expose human emotions and motivations to awaken the true desires of our characters. Everyone is worried about only two questions: sex and death, every day. And if we want to scare users or cause shock, then we have to seriously think about these two topics. The developer of the first Silent Hill began with the construction of the town and the creation of a 3D engine. The game environment was the main goal of the development team. And because of this, the plot of the first part was full of holes and inaccuracies. In order not to repeat the mistakes of the past, the renewed team of Team Silent decided to focus on creating an elaborate narrative that would focus on human emotions, destinies, and relationships. In addition to this, monologues and dialogues of the characters were to become an important part of the plot. Thus, the development team wanted to make Silent Hill 2 more like a movie than a game. Probably the developers saw the path that competitors from Capcom were taking in the development of Resident, so they wanted to add a cinematic game camera and hyper-realistic cutscenes to the game. But due to the fact that the team did not have a final game script, fully investing in cinematics was a rather dangerous decision. After all, this could cause problems with the balance between gameplay and the story. Here, it's worth saying that the main plot of the upcoming Silent Hill 2 changed at least twice during development. The first version of the story was largely based on the English folk tale about Jack the Ripper, a serial killer who killed between 5 and 15 people in London in 1888. In fact, only 5 of Jack's victims are known today, as all others are reported missing. One of Jack's famous victims was Marianne Nichols, whose name the developers would choose for one of the main characters of Silent Hill 2. And the story about Jack the Ripper himself, whose name was Joseph according to one version, would be used by the developers in the section of the game about Brookhaven. Thus, in one diary, the player will be able to read about the mentally ill Joseph who suffered from a split personality, one of which was called the Ripper. But with the rest of the plot, the developers decided to move away. The second version of the basis for the plot of Silent Hill 2 was Fyodor Dostoevsky's novel Crime and Punishment, which was suggested to the team by Takayoshi Sato. Crime and Punishment is a novel about the movement of the main character's consciousness from crime to punishment, from rebellion to death, where a poor, mentally unstable former student Rodion Raskolnikov lives in a tiny room without means of subsistence and plans to kill and rob an old moneylender from whom he borrowed money. He thinks that this murder is nothing compared to the good things he can do with the money. He even feels like Napoleon Bonaparte. After committing the crime, Raskolnikov's consciousness collapses. It turns out that he is no Napoleon. He can't bear the guilt and begins to suffer from hallucinations, fevers, forgetfulness, fainting spells, and irrational behavior. Trying to justify his behavior, his subconsciousness becomes increasingly unstable, He dreams of blood and abuse, after which he begins to suffer from nightmares in reality and loses his sense of reality.
Are you sure it was the right room? I mean, maybe Danny made a mistake.
He must have gone in that room. The door was open, the lights were on.
I just don't understand it. What about those bruises on his neck?
So, the developers decided to reproduce a similar focus on madness and how committing crimes can lead a person to enter another world in the plot of the upcoming Silent Hill 2. Well, of course, the idea of the novel Crime and Punishment was not the only source of the team's inspiration. At the same time, Masahiro Ito became interested in art house cinema, especially in the works of directors David Lynch and Stanley Kubrick. Because of this, the main motifs and even some cutscenes in Silent Hill 2 are inspired by such films as Blue Velvet, Lost Highway, A Clockwork Orange, Full Metal Jacket, and also, to a lesser extent, by the works of director Alejandro Jodorowsky. Having the basis for the plot and the vision of what exactly should happen in the game, the developers moved on to the character's creation. Unlike the first part in Silent Hill 2, the developers moved away from symbolism as the main model of building a character. They wanted to create real people who you could just meet on the street with real lives and problems. And to reproduce people as accurately as possible, Takayoshi Sato, character designer, moved to San Francisco for 9 months. There, he studied the everyday life of its citizens, the peculiarities of their gait and appearance, even, as strange as they may sound, the anatomy of a head of a typical American.
Oh, thank goodness. I was starting to think you wouldn't show, Dr. Dog.
Thus, the developers had the concept of the main character of Silent Hill 2, James Sunderland. During the game, James worked as a clerk in a small company, and James met his future wife Mary at a party at their mutual friends. They fell in love with each other at first sight, and as it happens, over time, the passion between them turned into a calm and stable relationship. The circumstances of the novel Crime and Punishment and the film The Lost Highway by David Lynch caught up with James. The movie tells the story of a suffering husband who suddenly realizes where his wife has gone. However, for the developers, James was not the main character. In fact, the main character was Maria, not to be confused with Mary, a charming woman who embodied all the ambiguity of Silent Hill 2. Takayoshi Sato made Maria, on the one hand, an absolutely angelic creature. She's beautiful and fragile, without a single wrinkle on her face. But on the other hand, she looks like a naughty girl. Her behavior and movements are very vulgar, like a real-life succubus, the demon of lustful dreams. By the way, according to the original idea, Maria should have been hotter than it turned out.
It's no good. It's locked.
As for the other characters who got to the town of Silent Hill, according to the team's plan, they were supposed to be the wandering souls of the town. A character named Eddie Dombrowski was originally supposed to be the only positive character in the game, helping James in his wanderings. But the creators abandoned this idea and did the opposite. By the way, the developers borrowed the name Eddie from the actor Eddie Murphy. Another character, Angela Orosco, is just as lost in this world, a 19-year-old girl looking for her missing mother in a foggy town. She herself ended up in Silent Hill because of an abusive relationship with her father and brother. They severely affected her mental health. The last character in the game which had a human appearance was a girl named Laura. Because of her innocence, she does not see any monsters or serious anomalies in the town. As in the first part, Masahiro Ito worked on the monsters in the game. Therefore, it's not surprising what abominations will terrify James during his search. This time, Masahiro wanted to make the monsters look more like humans than dogs, butterflies, and pterodactyls. They were all supposed to be grotesque figments of James's mind. When creating the monsters, Ito was guided by the idea of giving the images human features in order to evoke a feeling of pity in those who would kill them. Players had to believe that all creatures were once human. Most of all, this should be reflected in the way enemies move, which was based on the gait of a drunk person or on the crawling of small children. That's how one of the most recognizable characters in the game industry, Pyramid Head. was invented for Silent Hill 2. Even those who've never played Silent Hill have probably heard of Pyramid Head at least once. It's hard not to recognize this guy. His image is really scary. And it all started with the fact that during the creation of the plot of Silent Hill 2, Team Silent asked themselves the question, how to embody the feeling of guilt that must haunt the main character in the game? Well, since the monsters in Silent Hill are manifestations of the protagonist's subconscious, it's quite logical that James's conscience can also appear in the game in the form of a monster. Pyramid Head became the image of James' conscience. In addition, the inspiration for the creation of the Pyramid Head for the team was a quote from the film Jacob's Ladder by Adrian Lyne. The only thing that burns in hell is the part of you that won't let go of life, your memories, your attachments. They burn them all away, but they're not punishing you. They're freeing your soul. But if you've made your peace, then the devils are really angels, freeing you from the earth. When creating Pyramid Head, Masahiro Ito chose to make a monster with a face hidden from the player so that it would look inhuman and cause anxiety. He developed the first concept but eventually dropped it, believing it looked too much like a normal person in a mask. Eventually, Ito reworked the look, adding a large pyramid-shaped helmet and a butcher's robe to make him appear more superhuman. For the inspiration for the legendary pyramid-shaped helmet, Ito looked among the frightening machinery and borrowed the lower part of the German tank Tiger used during World War II. Indeed, Ito was very fond of tanks and military equipment. In addition to tanks, the creator was also influenced by a painting made in 1995 while studying at art school depicting an anthropomorphic object in the shape of a pyramid as part of the Strange Head series. Nevertheless, in addition to the Pyramid Head, about 10 different monsters were planned for the game, including 4 bosses. We will definitely talk about them separately a little later. As a result, when all the developments were ready, all it was needed was only to combine the plot and characters in the video game project. But it was another task because in March 1999, the PlayStation 2 was announced.
Welcome to the third place.
PlayStation 2! The third place!
To be honest, this console ad looks pretty scary. Just what you need to get users in the mood for the new Silent Hill. The second coming of Sony to the console market was a revolution in the entire gaming industry. The PlayStation 2 quickly became one of the most popular consoles of all time. It opened up new and unique technical capabilities to video game developers that its predecessor, the Dreamcast, did not have. After all, Sony invested $1.2 billion to create a new emotion engine processor, which could produce from 7.5 to 16 million polygons per second, while the Dreamcast processor could only produce 5 million. But in order to take advantage of these new features of the PS2, developers had to actually learn how to walk again. The PlayStation 2 had a completely new architecture, and this meant that all the games that were on the PlayStation 1 did not go on the PlayStation 2. And in order to create new games, it was necessary to write completely new game engines from scratch and to understand the unexplored and confusing architecture of the new console on their own. The same happened to the development team of Silent Hill 2. The engine of the first part was not suitable for use on the PlayStation 2, and since the development of Silent Hill 2 began at the end of 1999 when the PlayStation 2 was not officially released, the console did not have any additional utilities. This meant that there were no ready-made game engines for it yet. If you're wondering how developers could make games for the PlayStation 2 when it wasn't officially released yet, the answer is very simple. This was one of Sony's marketing decisions that was beneficial to both themselves and the game studios. After all, those developers who wanted to release their future game on the PlayStation 2 were provided with a special dev kit, or developer's kit, which allowed them to develop a game for the new PS2 and thereby release the game before others. And Sony, on the other hand, advertised games that were created before the release of the PlayStation 2. So let's go back to Silent Hill. Who took responsibility for creating a new engine for the game? It was Norihito Hatakeda, who joined the creative team of Silent Hill 2 in late 1999 when Imamura and the team were replenishing the staff with new talented faces. In the game's official credits, Hatakeda is listed as the graphics engine developer, referring to the development of the game's effects, for example, fog. But in fact, it was Hatakeda who wrote the main driver of the future game for 6 months without any days off. And the first demonstration of the engine's capabilities already looked pretty good. After the game's release during the period from 2001 to 2004, Takeda registered 8 of his development patents, which were related to the Silent Hill series. So really, his work on fog in the Silent Hill series was revolutionary. The first part of Silent Hill used a basic fog texture to hide the game's unevenness and reduce the amount of space for drawing the terrain. In Silent Hill 2, there was no such need. PlayStation 2 had much more power and the ability to quickly draw translucent textures. Therefore, instead of a flat texture that only created the illusion of fog, Takeda made semi-transparent textures render in volume. That is, the computer program determined the size and appearance of the fog at any moment and created it separately for a specific moment of the player's location and movement in the area. This system also allowed for changes in the direction and size of the wind, creating a much more natural-looking dispersion of fog around the player. Of course, Takeda wasn't the only programmer on the team. Many talented employees were involved in the creation of the Silent Hill 2 mechanics. For example, the mechanics of the player's camera are no less revolutionary for the game. Besides moving according to the character's movement and observing them from fixed points like a CCTV camera, the game camera also rotated with the rotation of the character's head. This happened when the player was close to a nearby object. The system of a new method of image processing capable of appropriately displaying objects located in space was also revolutionary. So in this way, Takeda and the team managed to create a volume of light. Now the flashlight in the character's hand could illuminate the space quite realistically. Approaching or moving away from the object or terrain changed their lighting and shadow. Moreover, Takeda insisted on adding the mechanic of dismembering enemies to the game. Of course, not so bloody, but the enemies, according to Takeda, were supposed to lose certain limbs, thereby acquiring an even more terrible image. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, the team abandoned such an idea. After all, such concepts were already sufficiently provocative and could harm the game's release. Finally, with a truly revolutionary game engine in hand, Team Silent could move on to transferring the characters and the rest of the work directly into 3D space. By the way, they drew several sketches for each of the characters, including images from different sides, which clearly demonstrated the shape of the skull. After that, they developed skeleton models of the characters, each of which contained about 6,000 polygons. And the next task in working on the characters was to bring these models to life. We want to remind you that the developers wanted the characters to be as human-like as possible. Therefore, the logical solution at this stage of development was the use of motion capture technology, which was already used when creating individual missions in Metal Gear. But for Silent Hill, it was the first time. The team rented a special room, found equipment, and hired actors to play the characters. All the actors played their roles live on stage with multiple cameras, crew, and directors. By the way, the same actors who played the characters had to voice them in the game itself. Guy Kihi was the first to get his role. He came to audition for the character of James Sunderland with his daughter. She auditioned for the role of Laura. As sad as it sounds, it was extremely easy for Guy to get used to the role of his character. After all, shortly before booking the audition, Guy broke up with his wife. I could easily convey tears and sadness when needed. I went through hell with my ex, and at times I was on the verge of suicide. If it wasn't for my kids, I'm not sure I would have made it. I could not bear the thought of leaving them alone with her. I mean, when the directors of Silent Hill 2 asked me to express my heartache, all I had to do was pull out some dark memories, and the sadness was right back at me. Guy spent only 4 days voicing the character, while the production and recording of the scenes for motion capture took place over 4 months. Several days were spent recording the walking, running, and death scenes. As for the other characters, dubbing actress Monica Horgan was chosen for the role of Maria. Donna Burke voiced Angela in the game. David Schaffel, also known as the voice of Brian Fury in the Tekken series, is voiced by Eddie Dombrowski. And Jacqueline Breckenridge voiced young Laura. The only problem faced by motion designer Takayoshi Sato is the characters' faces. After all, the motion capture technology did not make it possible to fully capture the nuances of facial expressions. Therefore, the developers had to do it manually. There was even a funny situation during this process when Sato personally tried to depict a lustful facial expression in front of the mirror, for which someone from the team called him a pervert.
But, if I make them in front of a mirror, I can notice it. I can capture it.
Separately, it's worth mentioning the work on audio. Of course, Silent Hill could not do without an incredible musical arrangement. The composer and sound engineer of Silent Hill 2 was Akira Yamaoka. Yes, the same creative guy who wrote the unique soundtrack of the original. He stated that his work has its own style, which was not inspired by any films. Yamaoka wanted to delve further into the sonic philosophy of the game. After all, now the main sound in the game had to be silence. After all, it was this oppressive silence that should arouse the player's feeling of anxiety and expectation that something will come out of the fog at any moment. As for the soundtrack, Akira wanted to make sure that when listening to his music, players would feel the same emotions as the game characters. He wanted to change the perception of the environment in the concept of his music, which was formed after the release of the soundtrack to the first part of the series. So I kind of took a step back and focused on making music that was easy and comfortable for ordinary people to listen to. Thus, now in Silent Hill 2, there are much more sad, melancholic guitar and trance compositions, which created the game's spirit. In addition to everything, the Sony PlayStation 2 had a really cool sound chip, which allowed the player to listen to high quality and surround sound even with bad headphones or TV speakers. So without serious problems and special adventures, the development of Silent Hill 2 came to an end. The first presentation of the future game took place in 2000 at the Tokyo Game Show, and already before the release, Silent Hill 2 was brought to the E3 conference in 2001. Therefore, the game completely surpassed the experience of Silent Hill 1. And gathered around a lot of fans and those willing to get to know the game for the first time. The developers appeared on stage, promising that Silent Hill 2 will be even scarier, even cooler, and so on. This time, the team even had its own unique stand with a game demonstration with the figures of James and Laura. In short, the promo campaign to promote the game was successful even before its release. But while the game's not out yet, so to speak, let's remember what exactly the second part of the series was about. It's time to talk about the plot of the legendary Silent Hill 2. The main events of Silent Hill 2 take place around 1994. We'll remind you that the town of Silent Hill is located in America, in the state of Maine. It was built by European settlers on a site that was previously considered a place of strength by Native Americans. It was because of this magical power that a mysterious cult began to form in the town, which took control of most of the town's infrastructure. One of the deities worshipped by the cult was Valtiel, who served as an angel of rebirth and a godlike being who appears in many forms throughout the town's history. The cult began performing ritual executions wearing white suits with red hoods. It was because of this cult that the town began to sink into misery, but the player will be able to learn more about the history of this cult only in Silent Hill 4. Therefore, if you're interested in learning more about the history of the town of Silent Hill, like it and let us know in the comments that you're waiting for new videos dedicated to this series. So, let's move directly to the game plot. 3 years before the events of Silent Hill 2 and a fatal disease, Mary Shepard Sunderland, together with her husband James, went to the town of Silent Hill on vacation. One of the places they visited was the Silent Hill Historical Society, which contained paintings and artifacts related to the Valtiel cultist clan. It was there that James saw the painting Misty Day, Remains of the Judgment, a stylized image of an executioner standing among bodies in cages. This picture had a strange effect on James that he could not explain. After the tour at the Historical Society, the couple stayed at the Lakeview Hotel in room 312, where James made a video with Mary. But it's not what you might think. In this video, Mary said that she had heard that Silent Hill was a sacred place, that she likes the town and would like to go to Silent Hill again one day. She asks James to promise to take her back to Silent Hill one day, but the video ends before James can answer. While leaving the town, James accidentally forgets the videotape at the hotel. The couple had already left Silent Hill. Shortly after her vacation, Mary contracted an unknown terminal illness and was confined to her hospital bed. The doctors predicted that she had less than 3 years to live. Because there's no effective treatment for her disease, they couldn't help her. The disease changed Mary's skin tone and caused her hair to fall out, stripping her face of any trace of beauty. James questioned Mary's doctors about her illness and could not believe that they were leaving Mary to die. He searched medical books for information about Mary's illness but could find nothing useful. Mary was getting worse. She began to lose her mind little by little and began to lash out first at the doctors and then at her husband. Because of this, James began to visit Mary in the hospital less often. Mary began to suffer from depression with the desire to leave this world, claiming that, quote, it would have been easier if the doctors just took her life. But Mary was able to recover a little thanks to the memories of Silent Hill, the last place where she was happy. She talked about the town with another patient, a little orphan girl named Laura, who was put in the same ward as Mary. That's how they became close. Mary often waited for James, and Laura often comforted her when he wasn't coming. Ultimately, Mary and James's relationship was soured when an illness enabled Mary to have children. After learning about this, James began to drink to avoid pain and loneliness, but it didn't change anything. Mary became a burden for James, and he began to have dark thoughts, due to which he stopped visiting his wife altogether. Sensing that the disease was finally taking her life, Mary wrote farewell letters to Laura and James and asked her nurse Rachel to give them these notes when she was gone. Before her death, the doctors allowed Mary to return home for a short time, but only because her death was imminent and she feared that James would never see her again. At home, James was tasked with being Mary's caretaker, but seeing his wife die became an even greater burden for him. Time has passed. After receiving dying letters from his wife Mary, James Sunderland arrives in the town of Silent Hill. However, the letters look very strange, because Mary died 3 years ago, and who could have sent them to him? One letter says that Mary is waiting for James in their special place.
In my restless dreams, I see that town, Silent Hill.
This wording confused James, as the entire town of Silent Hill was their special place. James checks to see if the letter is some kind of joke, but is sure that it is definitely in Mary's handwriting. James recalls that he once promised to return to Silent Hill with Mary at the Lakeview Hotel. Therefore, he decides this is where he wants to go. Leaving the town observation deck, the man takes a map and goes into town, but suddenly it turns out the road to the town is blocked. Then James decides to take a detour around Toluca Lake. After walking along a long and foggy path to Silent Hill, James ends up in a cemetery where he meets Angela Orosco, a nervous young girl who's come to town to look for her missing mother. She warns him that something is wrong with the town and that it can be dangerous to walk through it, but James ignores her warning. Continuing through the abandoned area, James reaches Silent Hill. He discovers that this is not the beautiful town that it was just a few years ago. In addition to the bizarre, omnipresent fog, the whole town seems to be rotting. Walking further, the man sees bloody tracks on the asphalt, and around the street corner, a strange figure which suddenly hides in the fog. James goes further and sees that the way to the town center is blocked. He tries to climb over the fence, but meets a monster on his way that looks like a man in a straitjacket, but the shirt is not made of fabric. It resembles human skin. This is the first enemy that James has to fight. This is where he gets his first real weapon, a wooden stick. Well, in such a situation, consider a piece of a broken bottle a good weapon. Having defeated the monster, James continues to wander through the foggy town. He finds more corpses and the same monster he killed recently. James walks further through town and decides to take a shortcut through an apartment complex to get to the very special place he believes Mary mentioned in her letter. In the apartment complex, James finds a key behind the bars. When the man tries to get it, a small unknown girl steps on his hand and runs away. It's Laura. Being an orphan, she became very close to Mary, but it's not known how exactly the girl's parents died. Like James too, she's looking for Mary and is unaware of her fate. But unlike James and Angela, Laura is the only innocent person in town who doesn't have darkness in her heart. James gets up and walks further down the dark corridors of the building. In the dead end of one of the corridors of the house, James meets the Pyramid Head. The monster doesn't do anything, just stares at James, as if reminding him of something he's forgotten. Exploring the dark corridors and rooms beyond, James enters a room where he sees Pyramid Head having intercourse with two other monsters. James sees this and quickly hides in the wardrobe. Pyramid Head turns towards the wardrobe and approaches it. James prefers to save himself, so he shoots Pyramid Head with a gun, but the monster disappears. James continues his journey. Finally, he finds a way out and enters another building where he finds a body in a refrigerator. After that, he also meets a living person, a young man named Eddie Dombrowski, who vomits in one of the toilets. Eddie Dombrowski is an overweight, insecure, mentally ill boy who's been brutally bullied by others. That is why, in search of some freedom, Eddie escapes from the cruel world to the town of Silent Hill. And the longer he stays in this town, the more Eddie dares to kill the next person who offends him. When asked about the body in the refrigerator, Eddie answers defensively,
Eddie. Who's that dead guy in the kitchen?
I didn't do it. I swear I didn't kill anybody.
Soon, in another apartment complex, James meets Angela again, who is lying in front of a large mirror and with a knife in her hand, is thinking about taking her own life. Trying to talk Angela out of it, James convinces her to give him the knife for her own safety, but she runs away in a panic in search of her mother. After James leaves the apartment complex, he finds Laura humming a song to herself while sitting on a graffiti-covered wall. Laura tells James that she knows Mary and knows that he never loved her anyway. After these words, Laura runs away. James is completely confused as to what is happening to him. Who are these people whom he met at that time? The man moves on and finally reaches Rosewater Park. Here, James meets a woman named Maria, who looks exactly like his wife, Mary.
Mary? No, you're not.
Do I look like your girlfriend?
No, my late wife.
Maria begins to openly flirt with James, speculating that she looks like his wife. When James tries to finish the stupid conversation, Maria asks him for help because there are a lot of monsters in the town and she's afraid to be alone. Now Maria begins to accompany James everywhere. After the conversation, the man enters Pete's Bolorama Bowling Club, where he meets Eddie and Laura again. Seeing James, Laura starts to run away. James runs out into the yard to catch up with the girl, wanting to know something about his wife. Outside, Maria claims to have seen Laura and, worrying about her, tells James that they should go after the girl. Walking through the town streets, James and Maria see Laura walk into Brookhaven Hospital. During the examination of the hospital, Maria gets sick and decides to stay in one of the hospital wards. James continues his search and finds Laura in another room. He begins to claim that she's lying, that he has known Mary for the past year. After all, this contradicts the fact that his wife died 3 years ago. Laura, offended by these accusations, locks James in a ward full of terrible monsters. After defeating the monsters, James loses consciousness, and the hospital unexpectedly shifts to the other world. James wakes up and finds himself in the same room. He goes in search of Maria and finds her in the basement of the hospital. However, Maria angrily claims that James has left her and that he cares more about his dead wife than her.
Anyway, I'm glad you're alive.
Anyway? What do you mean, anyway? You don't sound very happy to see me. I was almost killed back there. Why didn't you try to save me?
A manipulative lady. After Maria calms down, the characters continue their search for Laura together, through the eerie corridors of Brookhaven Hospital. After checking all the wards, they take the elevator down to the very basement of the hospital. But while they're going down, a strange radio broadcast begins to sound in the elevator. An unknown show in which James seems to participate. Judging by Maria's reaction, she's in shock.
Everybody, thanks for tuning in. See you again sometime. Bye-bye.
What was that?
After reaching the basement in hopes of finding Laura, James and Maria find nothing but a mysterious ring in the fridge. Then they go down the fire escape to the exit. Just then, the Pyramid Head suddenly appears on their path and starts chasing James and Maria. The couple is forced to run to the elevator. James runs in first and manages to save himself, but Maria is less fortunate. The elevator is jammed, and Pyramid Head manages to kill Maria. The elevator stops at the right floor. Desperate of losing his companion, James decides to refocus on his original goal of finding Mary. But before leaving the hospital for good, James walks into a room that looks strangely alive and furnished. In it, James finds a map with marked directions, following which he will be able to find the letter. James leaves the hospital and finds the same letter, which says that the old bronze key is buried under a statue in Rosewater Park, thanks to which he'll be able to get into the depths of Silent Hill's historical society. The places where they were with Mary when they first came to town. At the Historical Society, James finds Toluca Prison and the Labyrinth, where he meets Pyramid Head again. In the Labyrinth, James miraculously finds Maria alive, a woman locked in a prison cell, and greets James with Mary's memories.
After we got separated in that long hallway? Are you confusing me with someone else?
Maria reminds James about his vacation with her in the hotel, which gets him surprised. After all, he spent time in the hotel with his wife, Mary, not Maria. Instead, she replies that James can call her Maria if he likes, and also reminds that he forgot one very important thing at the Lakeview Hotel, a videotape. James tells Maria that he will release her and sets out to find a way to do it. Wandering through the creepy corridors, James finds a newspaper on the floor from which he learns that Angela killed her father, who physically abused her along with her mother. The more James moves along the corridor, the more it's covered with newspaper pages. The man finds a door under the newspapers and enters a cramped room. Inside, he sees Angela trying to protect herself from an ugly creature, Abstract Daddy, a monster that is a woman's terrifying image of her father. James saves Angela by killing Abstract Daddy. But instead of thanking James, she expresses her distrust of him and men in general, as in her experience, they always want, quote, only one thing. Angela calls James a liar who didn't want Mary around anymore and leaves the room. James moves on after examining the bodies of the hanged victims, finds a key that opens the passage to Maria's prison cell. But when he got to her cell, the man saw that Maria was lying on the bed, already breathless. Near the end of the maze, James finds Eddie. It can be seen from the boy that his psyche finally could not withstand the bullying and verbal insults from his peers, which he heard for his appearance and being overweight throughout his life. Eddie says that he killed the football hooligan's dog and then shot its owner, who was insulting him in the leg. James casually asks Eddie if he's crazy. This causes a real fight between James and Eddie.
You need help, Eddie. Don't get all holy on me, James. This town called you too. You and me are the same. We're not like other people. Don't you know that? Let's party!
James kills Eddie in an attempt to defend himself. What he has done causes shock and shame for his own act. He stepped over the human. After that, James only gets worse and begins to question his own perception of the events that led him to Silent Hill. Also, the letter he supposedly received from Mary turns out to be blank, and it turns out that the letter itself never really existed. James leaves the maze and gets on the boat. He swims to the Lakeview Hotel, hoping to find Mary there. In the hotel restaurant, James finds Laura, and she gives him a letter in which it turns out that at one time Mary wanted to adopt her. This letter becomes confirmation that Laura has known Mary for the past year. In room 312, James is watching a tape that he apparently left at the hotel 3 years ago. This tape finally connects all the dots in the story that James tried so hard to remember. It turns out that when Mary became extremely ill, James could not stand it. He walked over to Mary's bed, kissed her on the forehead, and choked her softly with a pillow. The video shows a man killing his terminally ill wife. After watching, James sits in silence, realizing the horror of his act. Laura finds James, and he decides to reveal the truth to the girl. Laura becomes furious with James for the way he treated Mary. She screams that she hates him and storms out of the room without saying a word. At this moment, Mary's voice begins to sound from the radio that James carries with him. She begs to find her.
That voice.
James explores the rest of the hotel, finding that there are only charred and rotting remains of the building. Climbing up from the basement, James finds Angela standing on a burning staircase next to two grotesquely framed bodies on the wall, representing her dead father and brother. Angela asks James to give her back the knife so that she can be done with all of it, but James refuses. As a result, Angela climbs the burning stairs through the fire. James says that the room is hot as hell. To this, the woman replies, "It's always been like this for me," meaning that her life has always been hell. At these words, Angela disappears behind the flames. James returns to the hotel lobby where he finds Maria tied up and guarded by 3 pyramid heads. Maria begs James for help. The man asks the monsters not to touch her, to leave them both alone, but the pyramid heads commit a merciless murder. Desperate, James begins to realize that the pyramid heads were created to punish him for his sins. He engages in battle with 2 of them. After James has sufficiently weakened the pyramid head, they impale themselves with their own spears, symbolizing the goal achievement. After that, James climbs the stairs to the roof of the hotel where he sees Mary alive. She says she is not Mary and blames James for her death. He says that everything is happening because of him, and now, to end everything for him, he must die. After that, Mary's body terribly mutates and the woman turns into a monster in front of James' eyes. The woman becomes the final boss of the game, a flying cage with a body that attacks with bats. After defeating the monster, the player is presented with a final cutscene. James sits over the dying Mary in bed and asks to forgive him. His wife says in her last words that he has had enough of suffering and calls his name for the last time. After that, James takes his lifeless wife in his arms and carries her out of the room. Then James gets into the car and drives away from the place where Mary died. Now, without her, his life will never be the same. And what it will be, it is not known, because it's on this sad note that the plot of Silent Hill 2 ends. But this is only one of the endings. And as we know, Team Silent never leaves a player with one ending. We'll talk about others a little later. Because this time, Team Silent did not stop at just one game plot. In Silent Hill 2, the developers gave players a new, unique opportunity to play as Maria.
When I woke up, I was all alone. Everyone's gone. Is it because of those monsters?
The script Born from a Wish is a prequel to the events of the main story, Silent Hill 2, although this script was issued already after the official release of Silent Hill 2. The Maria we see in Born from a Wish is much less sassy and self-confident than in the main plot of the game. In the prequel, it's revealed that Silent Hill is the town where Maria was born, and this fact further strengthens her ambiguous image. After all, the player is not given any hint except for the prequel's title, whether this birth was physical or metaphorical. The prequel begins with Maria waking up alone and scared in her room. After thinking of what to do, she finally decides to try to find someone in the town. Armed with a revolver and a Chinese cleaver to protect herself, Maria begins to wander the foggy, monster-infested streets of Silent Hill, until she finally ends up at Baldwin Manor. Exploring the premises, she meets the owner of the house, Ernest Baldwin, although to tell the truth, she never saw him. After all, the man refuses to make contact, and all their conversations are conducted through the locked door of his room.
Stop it. You're disturbing me.
Thank God. I finally found somebody. Can you open the door?
No.
Ernest speaks in a strange monotone voice and asks her to find him a white chrism at the Blue Creek Apartments that will help him bring back his dead daughter, Amy. Maria agrees to help Ernest, however she admits it may not work, saying, "I'm not against fighting for an impossible cause." After Maria retrieves the white chrism for Ernest, who else, he tells her a little more about himself and a man named James Sunderland. He warns Maria that James is a bad person and that he is looking for her who is not really her. These words awaken something in Maria, and she begins to search for memories of James. Among these memories, she remembers that deep down James is a good person. Finally, Maria opens the door to Ernest's room, but the room is empty. To some extent, this can be seen as ironic, because Ernest may be as real to Maria as Maria is to James. Disappointed, Maria leaves the Baldwin house. She thinks about ending her own life and even puts a gun to her head, but at the last moment changes her mind and throws the gun at the graffiti wall. In desperation, Maria decides to walk through the town in the direction of Rosewater Park, hoping that James will find her. That's why she whispers his name. And while we're not far from the main plot of Silent Hill 2, let's consider all possible endings of the game. As in the first part of the game, Team Silent gave players the opportunity to look at the conclusion of the story in different ways. This time, they prepared 6 endings of the game available to the player. 3 of them are considered Easter eggs, but we'll talk about them later. How did the tragedy of James and Mary Sunderland end? In fact, Silent Hill 2 does not have a canonical ending. This was even officially stated by the developers themselves. Each game ending depends on the player's gameplay and their actions, just as it is up to James to escape the endless horror of Silent Hill. The endings also depend on the player's certain actions. For example, how much health James will have during the battle with the final boss, or how much time James will spend with Maria and whether he'll purposefully protect her. Yes, if you keep full health during the boss battle, don't pay too much attention to Maria, and listen to one conversation in the corridor of the Lakeview Hotel, you'll unlock an ending called Leave. In this finale, as James climbs the stairs to the final boss, he sees Mary, who will make one last attempt to get him to accept her for who she is. James pushes Mary away because he doesn't need her anymore. After that, Mary declares that he deserves to die too and transforms into the final boss. After defeating the boss, James meets Mary in her room. She forgives him for killing her, gives him a letter, and tells him to get on with his life. James then leaves Silent Hill through the cemetery with Laura, possibly intending to fulfill Mary's wish and adopt the girl. Another game ending is called Maria. The conditions of this ending can be considered the antipode to Leave. After all, in order to see it, the player needs to spend a lot of time with Maria and protect her from monsters, follow up on her quests, and even visit Maria when she's unwell at Brookhaven Hospital. However, on the last boss, the player must also keep the character's health at the highest level and listen to the dialogue in the corridor.
James, I've been waiting.
Mary, I'm sorry it took so long.
The final boss turns out to be Mary again. She's angry at James for not paying attention to her while she was sick. The woman accuses her husband of wanting Maria, and after that, she transforms again into the final boss. After winning the battle, James looks out over the lake in Rosewater Park where he first met Maria while playing the game. Then a living Maria appears from the fog and asks James if he killed Mary again. James thinks that the fight with Mary was just another illusion of his and asks Maria to be with him. Maria gives Mary's letter to James, after which they leave Silent Hill together. Unexpectedly, Maria begins to cough, and it seems that she is sick, just like Mary, and this means that the events that led to the murder may repeat themselves with James again. The last ending that the player can see during the first playthrough of the game is called In Water. To see it, the player needs to keep the character's health at a low level on the final boss, periodically inspect Angela's knife in the inventory, and also read the patient's diary on the roof of Brookhaven. This, by the way, is the same diary that refers to us to the story of Jack the Ripper, which we talked about at the beginning of the video. After that, James meets Mary in the finale, and the events repeat the Leave ending. However, this time, after the victory, James finds Mary dying in her room. She tells James that he has already served his time for her murder and gives him a letter. Mary dies before James can reply. He takes her in his arms and carries her out of the room.
Without you, Mary, I've got nothing. Now we can be together.
James comes to the conclusion that he cannot live without Mary and realizes that he came to Silent Hill to shorten his life. The player soon hears James steer his car into Toluca Lake, and the screen shows an image of the bottom of the lake with bubbles rising to the surface. But the most interesting among all, in our opinion, were the secret endings of Silent Hill 2. The first among them is the Rebirth finale. To unlock this ending, the player must collect a number of items during replay, such as the White Chrism in the Blue Creek apartment, the Lost Memories book at the Texon Hess gas station, the Obsidian Goblet at the Historical Society, and the Crimson Ceremony book in the reading room of the Lakeview Hotel. After defeating the final boss, the monstrous Mary, the player will be shown a cutscene in which James is sailing on a boat with Mary's body. He heads to the Church of the Rebirth, located on a small island in the middle of Toluca Lake, to try to perform a ritual to revive his beloved. The next unique ending even has its own backstory. During the development of Silent Hill 2, when it came to creating endings, the development team came up with an interactive play to find interesting ideas for a silly game ending. They created a suggestion box asking, what is the reason Silent Hill is the way that it is? One of the answers received was dog. It's not known who wrote it and what they meant, but without hesitating much, the team willingly accepted this option. Thus, in Silent Hill 2 appeared the ending called Dog. To open it during the second playthrough, the player just needs to find the dog key in the booth near the Jack's Inn, and then use it to open one of the doors on the third floor of the Lakeview Hotel, after which the player saw the following.
お前の仕業だったのか?
Yes, your eyes are not lying to you. It turns out that everything in Silent Hill was controlled by a dog wearing headphones. Seeing this, James falls to his knees and the dog comes closer and starts licking his face. During the credits, the players saw exactly how the dog controlled the game.
Хто тримає
The last humorous ending of the game was already a classic ending with a UFO. In it, the developers completely broke off. To get it, the player must find a blue stone similar to the one we see in the first part of the game and apply it in 3 locations: Brookhaven Hospital Garden, in front of the boat at the pier, and in room 312 before watching the videotape. Then a UFO suddenly appears in the sky above the town. The protagonist of the first part of the series, Harry Mason, appears from the alien ship with a hyperblaster pointed at James. Harry apologizes for the inconvenience and asks James if he's seen his daughter Cheryl. Instead, a shocked James asks if Harry's seen his wife Mary. The aliens then abduct James onto the ship, to which Harry gives a thumbs up.
Your Mac friend, Brent Rambo.
Apparently, compared with the first part of the game, the difference in the thoughtfulness of the script in Silent Hill 2 is visible to the naked eye. Moreover, as the developers wanted, the dialogues really became the main driving force of the game. So, how did this affect the gameplay itself? Did the updated game engine improve the overall game mechanics, and was the immersion of players deeper in the atmosphere of Silent Hill 2? It's time to get to the main thing and remember what Silent Hill 2 was like in terms of gameplay. Something new is always compared to something old, especially when the same people are responsible for the new and for the old. If you look closely, the gameplay of Silent Hill 2 is not much different from the gameplay of the first part of the series. It's almost identical. The player engages in monotonous walking through the foggy town, picks up items, spends some time solving puzzles, and exploring the territory of Silent Hill. All this remained unchanged from the original, but something has changed. A mystical plot alone was not enough for the game's success. The developers wanted not only to attract a new audience, but also to surprise old fans. For example, the developers left a vibration on the controller that was triggered when James's health dropped to a critical point. At the same time, a new feature was now the vibration of the controller when James attacked or when he was attacked. This is how the developers recreated the simulation of the weapon's recoil, or the feeling of a blow that monsters inflict on the character. The developers did not forget about the vital things for the character: a flashlight that can illuminate the surrounding darkness, and a radio that made a characteristic sound when monsters approached the player. A new mechanic in the game was the ability of the character to block the blows of enemies. However, none of the players used this block in practice, especially when a gun got into their hands. And why is that block needed? The Pyramid Head Man doesn't see anything anyway. The player could even make a block with a gun, but there was one nuance associated with this process. You can block attacks only when the enemy is about to strike. In any case, it did not become a big problem for the players. Also among the new game mechanics, the presence of the player's partner, we can mention Maria, whom James meets during the game. Yes, she is of zero use when solving puzzles or destroying enemies, but this was the first attempt of the developers, and they tried not to repeat the gameplay solutions of competitors in Resident. So, Maria does not appear in the game as a companion of the Prince of Persia, Farah. By the way, we have a separate video on our channel about this couple and the history of the Prince of Persia series. We advise you to watch it if you haven't yet. Maria is a manifestation of James's delusional imagination and is born out of his inability to bear the guilt of murdering his wife, Mary Shepherd Sunderland. Like the people we see in our dreams, Maria questions James' belief that his wife Mary's death really happened. This is reflected directly in the visual image of Maria, as she is one of James's desires, in fact what he wanted his wife to be. Since Mary herself was bedridden, this is not exactly what James wanted. From the moment Maria becomes attached to James, the player has a vital need to constantly protect her. After all, she has no weapons, and if she dies, the player will see the well-known phrase, "Game over," on the screen. Perhaps this is done on purpose because according to the plot, Maria symbolizes James's wife, Mary, who became a burden for him. Therefore, as a result, Maria becomes a burden for the player as well. If this is the case, the player will be able to fully experience the suffering that the main character felt and still feels. And during the passage, the player will definitely have to suffer and experience the full range of James's emotions. The developers of Silent Hill 2 put no less emphasis on this than on the story. Fog and darkness remain the main symbols of the atmosphere and tools for creating suspense in the game. However, in the previous part, the main emphasis still remained on the all-consuming darkness, which only increased with the game's passage, until at the end of the game, the player finally plunged into the other world. But in Silent Hill 2, the fog, as a carrier of the atmosphere in the game, began to prevail over the darkness. This happened primarily because the developers managed to make it very realistic. Now the fog hides the horizon more and more, limits the field of vision, erases the border between heaven and earth, creating a blurred border between dream and reality. The constant expectation of danger and the unknown keep the player in suspense, which is further enhanced by complete silence.
Okay. Whoa.
The new symbols in Silent Hill 2 are seemingly endless corridors with rooms and also a constant feeling of closed space. All this symbolized the abyss of James's inner world, into which he looks from time to time and sees nothing. This effect of the abyss and dead end is also enhanced by the fact that more than half of the player's gameplay will be in the building's locations. And if the corridors and darkness tell us about James's inner world, then the fact that the town is actually rotting and falling apart before our eyes emphasizes the general suffering of the main character. For this, art director Masahiro Ito, together with Takayoshi Sato, specially traveled to America to find real examples of such rooms. Thus, for example, the toilet in which the opening scene of the game takes place, where James looks at himself in the mirror, is created almost identically to the real reference. Ito wanted the design of the town and the premises to make the player feel disgusted. The exterior should give the impression that the town is bigger than the outside viewer can imagine. The sequence of locations that the main character goes through was supposed to make the player feel isolated and lonely. For this reason, at the beginning of the game, the developers deliberately made the path through the forest to the cemetery too long so that the player at this moment could think and feel that the protagonist will never come back. In addition, they added a lot of strange and symbolic elements to the game. Among them, a traffic light operating in an abandoned town. Holes, which also include long downward staircases and vertical corridors, symbolize the chasm that opened in James's heart. A dead body with its back to the game camera, located in front of the TV in the Woodside apartments. The player may not understand who it is, but in fact the corpse looks just like James. This image is a reflection of the main character's imagination. The dress on the mannequin where the player finds the flashlight also has its own symbolic meaning. After all, this outfit once belonged to Mary. When you combine all these mysterious details, you can form the perfect background to evoke a feeling of the player's loneliness. But as you know, the main character will not be alone in Silent Hill, even when Maria is not with him. Enemies in Silent Hill 2 are half as many as in the first part of the game, but still enough. This is explained by the fact that, firstly, James has much fewer fears than the character of the first part, Alyssa Gillespie, through whom the monsters appeared. Secondly, for the developers, it became more important what these monsters mean to James himself and the people he meets in Silent Hill. Therefore, they put maximum emphasis on this. When I was working on the monsters in Silent Hill 2, I really made sure that every meaning of the monster's appearance pointed to the real person for James's journey, because these are something like illusions from his subconscious and not just targets in a shooting range. As we've already said, the Pyramid Head became the main curse for James. He became the very reminder to James of his deed and followed him like his conscience, appearing as the character increasingly remembered what he had done. In another story, Pyramid Head exists to keep James human and help him realize his guilt. Therefore, Pyramid Head often attacks other monsters so that James can fulfill his role. There's nothing particularly unique about Pyramid Head's abilities, apart from the possibility of one-shotting James with his giant sword. What is interesting is that James cannot fully defeat the Pyramid Head. He can only be weakened, so that he runs away. Therefore, the fight with the Pyramid Head encourages the player to be careful and think through the tactics of how to get rid of him. As for other enemies moving through the misty town, James can meet the Bubblehead Nurse. This creature looks like a woman about the size of Mary and appears in the lusty uniform of a nurse at Brookhaven Hospital. The creature's head is wrapped in a thin film under which a liquid mixed with blood flows out. The fluid-retaining mask gives the creature's head a swollen appearance, reminding James of Mary's swollen head during her hospitalization. In the other world, James encounters a dirtier version of the monster. The nurse there has torn clothes, a hump on her back and shoulders, and a bare skull riddled with spikes. As for abilities, the nurse is an ordinary monster, so she just rushes at the main character with a crowbar. Why using this weapon instead of scalpels or anything medical is not known. The next person James meets quite often in the world of Silent Hill is Mannequin. The mannequins look like two lower halves of a woman's body fused together, dressed in what looks like a swimsuit made of rotting leather. The upper pair of legs, on which there are no feet, is used by the monster for attack, and the lower one for movement. The wonders of this monster do not end there. After all, in a calm state, the mannequins stand still like statues and come to life only when illuminated by a flashlight from a fairly close distance. This is what sets them apart from most other monsters that react to light, no matter how far they are from its source. The mannequins also respond to noise and come to life if James gets closer than 5 steps to them, even when the flashlight is off. As opponents, mannequins are quite weak creatures, but they are difficult to detect in low light due to their low mobility. Also, the mannequins have the advantage of being stealthy, as James's radio doesn't respond to them when they come to life. Basically, Mannequin is a manifestation of James's natural needs. In other words, it appears as a result of James's sexual dissatisfaction due to the illness of his wife Mary. Perhaps this is why the players witness a scene where Pyramid Head commits lewd acts towards 2 mannequins in front of James, as another reminder to him of his dissatisfaction. Next, the player may encounter the Lying Figure. This is the same monster that James meets at the beginning of his road to the town. The bodies of the lying figures are covered in leather, resembling a straitjacket which constrains the creature's movements, and what looks more or less like a human body resembling a woman's legs with shoes on a platform. These figures make eerie wailing sounds that literally sound like metal screeching on cement. The monsters attack by throwing sprays of poisonous substance at the player. Looks like someone ate a burger that wasn't fresh. Thus, figures are the only ranged enemies in the game. Therefore, the best weapon against them is a gun.
Behind this door, a dark entity. Evil, ancient, and hungry.
Oh well. Let me go in and say hi.
Masahiro Ito designed the lying figure as a memorial to Mary in a state of terminal illness. According to the plot, Mary said, "I look like a monster." This supports the idea that the reclining figure was meant to represent how Mary saw herself, suffering in agony and inevitably trapped in her deceased body. Another monster associated with Mary is Flesh Lips. The creature looks like a bloated and swollen, shapeless mass with human limbs. This mass is clamped in a rusty metal cage, and the lower part of which the monster has the appearance of large lips. Flesh Lips move quite slowly. This makes the creature a less dangerous opponent. However, if the monster manages to reach James, it will most likely grab him and strangle him. The monster can also hit James with the side of the cage. This monster symbolizes 2 things at once. The cage symbolizes the bed to which Mary was glued due to a progressive disease that effectively limited her freedom, and the lips are her lips. According to Masahiro Ito, the monster's lips represent Mary's mouth when she often abused James with disgusting and cruel words in the last days of her life. There's also speculation that the creature's lips represent the labia, which would also strike a chord with James, but let's move on. The last intermediate monster the player encounters is the Creeper, a giant cockroach. How can the abandoned and rotting Silent Hill not include cockroaches? It does not carry any special meaning for James, as well as threats, just a feeling of disgust. The creepers came about because of the mystical power of Silent Hill itself. They've always been in it and will remain in it forever. When the usual monsters have been dealt with, if they can be considered such, it's time to talk about the bosses of Silent Hill 2. There are only 2 of them in the game. Moreover, the first of these is the result of Angela's suffering, not James's. His name is Abstract Daddy. As you understand from the name, it's difficult to describe the appearance of this creature. Abstract Daddy looks like 2 bodies merged into a single body in a metal bed frame. Wrapped in rotting skin, the bodies are a reflection of the act of reproduction, so to speak. But this kind of monster is not the only one available in the game. Angela perceives the monster's appearance differently than James. She sees it in this image. Her father, Thomas Orosco, that is why she calls him Daddy. And since James has never met Thomas, he perceives the monster in his own way. The author of the creature concept, Masahiro Ito, states, Abstract Daddy represents Angela's father, Thomas Orosco, and her brother hovering over her on the bed. The lower figure screams in agony, and its mouth resembles a genital organ. These aspects represent her father's and brother's sex abuse and Angela's suffering. The room in which the fight with the monster takes place is probably Angela's belly, stylistically. On the flesh-covered walls of the room, there are holes with pistons that make reciprocating movements. You can guess what these movements are visualizing. At the same time, each individual piston symbolizes how many times Angela experienced such humiliation. But there's another interpretation of this boss's image. The fact is that the monster symbolizes excessive, brutal masculinity. This sends us back to the scene where James kills Mary in bed. In this case, it becomes clear why James, like Angela, can see this monster. Here again comes the aspect of James's dissatisfaction with Mary's illness. After all, at the end of the fight with Abstract Daddy, Angela compares James to her father, claiming that he, quote, only needs one thing. The last enemy in the game will be the second and final boss, Mary, or, depending on the game's ending, the player can see Maria instead of Mary. After James climbs the stairs to the roof, he sees a woman there who looks like his sick wife. In the course of a short conversation, she turns into a monster that has the appearance of a distorted body suspended upside down in a metal bed frame, the same as Flesh Lips. This brings us directly to Mary's hospitalization. Long, sharp spikes are placed along the edges of the bed frame. Mary also has something like a triangular hood or a collar that restricts head movements. In addition, a long, sharp black tentacle protrudes from the back of the collar near the back of her head, with which Mary can strangle her opponent. This image reflects James's conflicted emotions about Mary in her final days. The creature's face resembles the face of the Virgin Mary, and the position in the cage resembles a crucifix. Suffering from an illness, confused in her true feelings, Mary attacks James and lashes out at him. As this boss does, it is ironic that Mary is able to strangle James with the tentacle just as he strangled her. Also, after Mary's murder, James is surrounded by a flock of butterflies, which are a symbol of death and decay. To be fair, they look and sound like a pack of bats. At the same time, Maria has a butterfly tattoo on her stomach in which Ito placed a symbol of rebirth. And this can also refer to us the image of butterflies in the first part of the game. But this is just a fan theory. In general, if you summarize all the above-mentioned images and references, it's clear to the naked eye that all the monsters in the game were created by the developers to improve the narrative component. No one was going to make a third-person shooter out of the Silent Hill series. Is it bad for gameplay? Probably not, because there were enough shooters in the world of computer games at that time. But Silent Hill was unique, especially since the enemies in the game did not pose any problems for the player due to the rather good weapons. The arsenal of weapons in Silent Hill 2 is very similar to what the players had in the first part: a rifle, great spear, shotgun, handgun, and pipe. All of them are useful against a certain type of monster, but what was always useful to have was a unique weapon. During the game, the player could take revenge on Pyramid Head for all his suffering by hitting him on the head with the real Great Knife. It can be found before James gets to the imprisoned Maria in the maze under the Silent Hill Historical Society. A single strike of the Great Knife dealt massive damage to enemies, killing most species in one hit. On the other hand, this knife could bring the Pyramid Head to a critical level of health in a couple of blows. But this knife had one inherent disadvantage. It is very heavy, and the character won't be able to run with it. Another unique weapon that the player could get was the Hyper Spray. In Silent Hill 2, it's something like the Laser Blaster from the first part of the game. It can be obtained if the player completes one of 3 tasks during the playthrough. Completes the game on the hard mode, completes the game twice, at least once on normal mode, or completes the game 3 times regardless of the level of difficulty. There are 4 varieties of Hyper Spray in the game. The purple spray is the weakest. It can mobilize enemies but does not damage them. Moreover, it's not even able to immobilize the final boss. In a word, fake. White spray is a little better. It can be used to paralyze most enemies and bosses while also dealing no damage to them, but this spray has the ability to kill creepers and can drive the final boss's butterflies away from the character, so-called the budget option. The yellow spray causes enemies to freeze in place for a bit longer. Interestingly, it's able to make mannequins fight each other. It's worth having with you for a good mood. And the latest and greatest is the green spray, which repels not only mosquitoes, but precisely butterflies. Instead of simply stunning enemies, the green spray kills them instantly. Unfortunately, this does not apply to bosses that don't die physically, like the Pyramid Head during the first fight with James. In such cases, the fight simply ends as the developers intended, but there's one problem that a player can face when using the spray. It also affects James, slowly draining his health. However, what is the difference when in Silent Hill 2 you can literally poison cockroaches? But as cool as all those sprays and great knives are, the best weapon in Silent Hill will still be the chainsaw. The player can only get the chainsaw during the second playthrough of the game. After talking to Angela Orosco in the graveyard at the beginning of the game, you can hear the distant sound of a chainsaw being turned on in the background. When leaving the cemetery, the sound gets louder. Later, James comes across a pile of logs near the Silent Hill Ranch with a chainsaw sticking out. A pleasant bonus for the player's ears is the battle cry that James will utter before each swing of the chainsaw. Well, in order to end this immersion in the game on a pleasant note, let's finally consider the Silent Hill 2 Easter eggs that the developers have left for especially attentive fans. To sum it up, most of the Easter eggs in the game are related to voices, sounds, and extraneous noises that the player can hear while wandering through the foggy streets and corridors of the town. For example, when James runs towards Silent Hill at the beginning of the game, you can hear additional footsteps as if someone is chasing him from behind. And in the Lakeview Hotel, when James walks past room 208, he can hear a man sobbing. Also at the Lakeview Hotel, if James walks into the living room with a flashlight on and examines the heater, he'll find a note in the back that reads, "I'm Johnny, one hot guy." This is a direct reference to Stephen King's book The Shining, where the main character Jack Torrance forgets to control the pressure in the old boiler room of the Overlook Hotel, which causes it to catch fire and explode. In general, during the game, the player can even find posters for the movie The Shining by Stanley Kubrick because the developers were very much inspired by cinema. Also associated with it is the moment when James walks into the room where Pyramid Head is mocking the two mannequins. This episode almost recreates a scene from the movie Blue Velvet by David Lynch. Just watch.
Yes, sir. Frank? Frank, let me talk to him. Please, Frank. Sir.
In addition, the movie Blue Velvet also sends the player in-game save points in the form of red sheets of paper, and the game bar Heaven's Night is generally created according to the image of the bar from this movie. Maria's outfit, which exactly repeats Christina Aguilera's outfit at the Teen Choice Awards in 1999, can be considered an interesting Easter egg, and at the very beginning of the game, the player can see posters with Maria as a dancer. The last significant clue to the game is a photo at the Silent Hill Historical Society of the game's development team itself. We talked earlier about all the other secrets and hints that the Japanese developers skillfully hid throughout the game. Surprisingly, the developers abandoned the idea of cramming a bunch of references to brands and stores in the game, as was the case in the first part. It's not for us to decide whether it's good or bad. Those who were the first to open a disc with a newly released game in 2001 have already decided everything for us. And before we recall how the community reacted to the game release, we want to remind you that you can support the release of new videos with your activity and subscription to our channel. The PressX team is already working on new videos for you, so it would be greatly appreciated if you'd like this video and leave a comment. This will help promote this video and speed up the new content release. If you like what we're doing, let us know about it in the comments and leave a like, and we'll continue. Silent Hill 2 was released for the PlayStation 2 on September 25, 2001 in North America, 2 days later in Japan, and November 23rd in Europe. The original European edition of the game also included a second disc, Making Of, which contained a DVD video with trailers, an artwork gallery, and a documentary about the game development. The total budget of the game was about $7 to $10 million. You probably have a question. How can the cost of development fluctuate as much as $3 million? This happened because this time Konami marketers decided to have fun. Since the game was already very famous and had a huge audience of fans all over the world, Konami should have just reminded them that Silent Hill was a very cool game. But before the game's release in 2001, 100 journalists from all over the world received a letter from Konami in which there was an invitation to a meeting in the forest near the town of Chantilly in France. On the certain day, the journalists went to the meeting and were frankly shocked. The meeting spot was an abandoned road in the middle of the forest. Suddenly, at the meeting spot with 100 journalists, a crowd of developers dressed in fancy costumes, cosplaying the bubble-headed Medestra, appeared from absolutely nowhere.
And all of them were equally confused that day when a crowd of blood-stained nurses gathered round and started arranging them all together. It was the beginning of a very strange, very memorable event, organized by Konami of Europe.
The nurses chanted that they were going to save Mary. And while this chaos was happening, nurses led journalists to military vehicles that were parked not far from the meeting spot. After putting the journalists in cars, they all went to some abandoned country house where some more entertainment was waiting for them. The house was styled as the Lakeview Hotel. It had bloody walls, red lights, fog, and screams in the background to convey the atmosphere of Silent Hill 2 as best as possible. The first full presentation of the finished game took place in this terrible house, but the action did not end there. After the first presentation, the theater of the absurd continued, and the journalists were led to the next hall where they had a chance to communicate with the developers. This magical presentation ended with the journalists having to drink something that resembled blood from a dirty sink, after which everyone happily went to play paintball. We hope that it became clearer where that $3 million went. There was also the usual advertising in Silent Hill 2 with both commercials on television and with posters and with promotion from Sony. Within a month of its release, Silent Hill 2 sold more than 1 million copies of the game in North America, Japan, and Europe. The most copies were sold in North America, 650,000 copies. Overall game reviews were very positive, with an average score of 89 out of 100 for the PS2 version and 84 out of 100 for the Xbox version on Metacritic. The only version of the game that not everyone was happy with was Silent Hill's PC port, which received mixed reviews and a score of 70 out of 100 on Metascore. The main reason for this was the game camera, which according to users was not convenient in the fight against monsters. And besides, the graphics in the PC version were noticeably worse than on the PS2. Later, already in 2012, Konami released the Silent Hill HD collection. In fact, it was the transfer of Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 3 to the new generation consoles, PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, with a resolution of 1280 by 720 and a frequency of 30 frames per second. In this edition, Konami wanted to polish everything that was not done in those days, but something went wrong. We will talk about Silent Hill 3 another time, and in Silent Hill 2 HD, players started experiencing strange bugs. The game crashed when entering new areas on the map, entire locations simply wouldn't load, the fog appeared in chunks that didn't look like fog at all, and the game itself was twice as dark. Since a slightly different team of people was responsible for this edition, the original game code was lost and reverse engineering had to be used to create Silent Hill 2 HD. This method allowed them to deductively find out the program algorithm and reproduce the program code, and because of the inaccuracies that arose during this process, the game had a number of problems. In addition, in the opening theme of the game during the monologue, the developers replaced the melody of the acoustic guitar with an electric guitar, changed textures on first aid kits and medical cross posters due to issues with the trademark of the Red Cross organization, and they also made an alternative voice dubbing. Thank God that it couldn't be changed to the original in the game. The strangest difference between this version of the game and the original was the replacement of the Sunderland videotape that was broadcast in the location of Hotel Room 312. If in the normal game version it was just a picture with a videotape effect, then in the HD edition it looked like you were actually watching a TV on the screen of which they broadcast a videotape. Probably another 12 years will have to pass and competitors from Capcom will catch a new wave of success with their remakes of the original parts of Resident Evil, so that the Konami studio will finally think about the need to update the iconic game. So after a series of unofficial leaks, the Konami studio officially announced a full-fledged remake of Silent Hill 2, which should be released in 2024. It's being worked on by the Polish studio Bloober Team, which signed a cooperation agreement with Konami and is best known for its psychological horror, Layers of Fear. And indeed, such an iconic game needs a high-quality modern re-release. After all, Silent Hill 2 entered the rating of the best games of all time and the chart of the best games for PS2, according to the edition of IGN. Silent Hill Historical Society and Brookhaven Hospital, which in reality has a real prototype, received special attention and places in prestigious ratings for design and atmosphere. To date, Silent Hill 2 has been repeatedly noted in various lists of the scariest games in history. Even the game's soundtrack music album, which Konami released separately, received overwhelmingly positive reviews from the game OST portal and the gaming community. According to their statements, the soundtrack for Silent Hill 2 is one of the best in the history of the gaming industry. It's characterized by a high degree of atmosphere, the ability to penetrate into the soul and sink into the player's heart, which is rarely found in other games. IGN website journalist Doug Perry wrote that Silent Hill 2 contains a gripping and sadly surreal story full of believable characters in an incredible atmosphere. According to the critic, in Silent Hill 2, players would constantly lose their psychological balance, feel nervous and terrified. Perry praised the features of the fog, the graphical excellence of the characters, textures, and cutscenes. Many critics also praised the game's graphics and character face animations, especially compared to other video games of the time. However, despite the fact that Silent Hill 2 was generally praised, the game also received a lot of criticism. Many fans of the first part of the game wanted to know what happened to Harry Mason, Sybil Bennett, Alyssa, and the cult. Fans of the series were disappointed that Silent Hill 2 tells a completely different story. Most of the criticism came from the Japanese audience. Also, fans of the original criticized the smaller scale of the town compared to the first game. Maria's artificial intelligence was also criticized, as she could sometimes get in the way of James's gun during a fight with enemies, or she did not go to a safe place fast enough, as a result of which she received damage from enemies. Silent Hill 2 actually became one of the best projects in the survival horror genre, a true work of art among video games. Many players consider Silent Hill 2 to be the best part of the entire Silent Hill series. A deeply emotional and provocative psychological plot, the story touches on taboo and controversial topics, which for 2001 seemed unheard of. And the atmosphere, full of various meanings and unique music, raised the bar for games in the horror genre to a level unattainable at that time. A few months after the game's release, the team Silent started talking about creating a third part of the game, but these conversations were not held in full. After the release, Takayoshi Sato, the designer of the characters and CGI of the game, left the team. In a strange way, Silent Hill exhausts people morally and creatively. Firstly, because of this, the father of the series, Keiichiro Toyama, and then Sato left the team. Maybe by constantly working on such complex and difficult topics, something breaks in people's heads and they just need a break from it to gain new strength and inspiration. Nevertheless, the team again needed replenishment. And although Silent Hill 2 was an extremely successful game, fans still demanded the continuation of the story of Harry Mason and his daughter Cheryl from the developers. The team was forced to rearrange their plans, change their orientations, and fulfill the wishes of the fans. But we'll talk about this another time. The path of Team Silent is thorny and unpredictable, but this did not stop the developers from continuing to work on the Silent Hill franchise, especially since after the release of the second part of the game, competitors from Capcom felt like losers. This further fanned the flames of rivalry between the developers of the two companies. The race between Silent Hill and Resident Evil continued and reached a new level. So if you haven't seen the story of the birth of the world's first survival horror, click on the link on the screen, or you can choose any other video on our channel. And that's all for today. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Don't forget to like it and subscribe to this channel. As always, you are watching PressX. See you soon.